You think your HOA is bad. Mine pointed a gun at my wife, not realizing she was the commander of the United States Secret Service. It happened right here in the quiet cul-de-sac of Maple Grove Estates. The lawns were perfect, the fences white, and the neighbors waved like we lived in a postcard. But beneath that picture-perfect surface, the kind of madness you'd only see in a bad movie, except this one was real. One evening during a neighborhood barbecue, our beloved HOA president Karen snapped. She pulled a gun, shaking, furious, ready to teach us a lesson. What she didn't know was that the calm woman standing across from her had been trained to take down terrorists, not deal with nosy suburban dictators. That night, the HOA crossed a line no one ever should and paid the price. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you love a good HOA revenge story, make sure to hit subscribe, because this one's about to get wild. When my wife Rachel and I first moved into Maple Grove Estates, it felt like a fresh chapter, a quiet one finally. After 3 decades working construction projects across the country, I was ready to retire, mow my own lawn, and fix things that didn't involve million-dollar budgets or government contracts. Rachel wanted the same peace routine, maybe a vegetable garden, if the soil was right. We found the perfect cul-de-sac, complete with oak trees, tidy sidewalks, and the kind of neighbors who waved with 2 fingers while holding their morning coffee. What we didn't know was that Maple Grove Estates wasn't a neighborhood, it was an empire, and its ruler was Karen. She introduced herself before we even unpacked. A woman in her mid-50 seconds, always wearing a bright red blazer and carrying a clipboard that might as well have been a royal decree. She smiled, but the kind of smile you see on realtors before they tell you your credit score disqualifies you. "Welcome to Maple Grove," she chirped. "We have a few community standards I'm sure you'll love." I should have taken that as a warning. That afternoon, we got our first friendly reminder. A printed letter slid under our door. All residents must ensure their trash bins are stored out of sight within 30 minutes of collection. Non-compliance may result in a fine of $50 per occurrence. 30 minutes. Not an hour, not by sundown, 30 minutes. Rachel looked at me and smirked. "Maybe she used to work for NASA," she said. "Precise timing like that." The first few weeks went smoothly enough. I painted the porch, Rachel planted roses, and we tried to keep to ourselves. But Karen's presence hovered like a surveillance drone. Every time I stepped outside, I'd see her walking her tiny dog, a trembling Pomeranian named Tater Tot, with her phone pointed suspiciously toward our house. One morning I was trimming the hedges when she appeared at the gate. "You know the HOA prefers hedge height to be uniform," she said, voice tight like she was afraid the air might carry bacteria. "Yours are about 2 inches higher than standard." I stared at her, pruning shears in hand. I didn't realize we were measuring. "Oh, we measure everything here," she replied, and walked off like she'd just issued a national security directive. I laughed it off at first. Everyone has a nosy neighbor, right? But this was different. Within a month, we'd received 3 letters. One about Rachel's wind chime being audibly disruptive, another about unapproved solar lights, and a third demanding we repaint the mailbox because it was fading toward beige. Rachel handled it calmly always. She'd sit with her tea, skim the letters, and file them neatly in a folder marked HOA, nonsense. I'd ask, "Why aren't you angry?" She'd smile faintly. "Because people like her don't know what real power looks like." At the time, I thought she was just being poetic. Then came the second homeowners meeting. I went out of curiosity and a bit of spite. The meeting took place in the community center, under fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly sick. Karen sat at the head of a folding table like a queen holding court. On her right were her 2 enforcers, Doug and Cheryl, the kind of neighbors who volunteer to police recycling bins for fun. The meeting started with routine stuff, lawn violations, fence colors, and whether decorative flags counted as visual pollution. But then Karen turned her clipboard toward me. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs, "we've received several complaints about your property's unapproved aesthetic modifications. Excuse me, the flowers. The red roses don't match the community's color harmony guidelines. We prefer whites, yellows, and soft pinks." I looked around, half expecting someone to laugh. But no, the room was silent. These people looked terrified of her. Rachel leaned close to me and whispered, "Don't take the bait." But I couldn't help myself. "Are you serious? You're regulating flower colors now," Karen's lips curled. "Rules are what keep neighborhoods like this desirable. If you wanted chaos, you could have bought a cabin in the woods." I took a deep breath, leaned back in my chair, and smiled. "Karen, my idea of chaos used to involve cranes, explosions, and 30-ton steel beams swinging over my head. I think we'll survive your flower policy." The room gave off a nervous chuckle, but Karen's eyes darkened. After that meeting, things changed. We weren't just the new couple. We became the couple who disrespected the HOA. Strange things started happening. The next week, our mailbox was dented. Then our lawn sprinklers mysteriously broke. The trash collector forgot our address twice. When I reviewed the footage from our porch camera, I caught glimpses of Karen's red blazer in the background every time. I brought it up to her one morning when she was patrolling the street. "Someone keeps damaging my property," I said. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" She didn't even blink. "Maybe you should read the bylaws again. Vandalism complaints require HOA review before any police involvement. Meaning you'll need my approval to file it officially." I stared at her, realizing this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was control. Pure, absolute control. That night, Rachel sat at the dining table flipping through the HOA's rulebook like she was studying an enemy dossier. I joked, "You look like you're preparing for a mission." She looked up that calm, unreadable look again. Maybe I am. For the next few weeks, she started documenting everything. Photos, timestamps, copies of letters, even small details like which car Karen drove and who she talked to. I asked her why, and she simply said, "Because bullies leave trails." Meanwhile, I started noticing something else, the fear in our neighbors' eyes. The Johnsons down the street whispered that Karen had fined them $500 for hanging a birthday banner. An elderly veteran had been reported for flying the American flag after quiet hours. And everyone said the same thing: "Don't cross her, she knows people." It was like living in a dictatorship with white fences and Christmas lights. One morning a letter arrived, not in the mailbox, but taped directly to our door in red ink: "Final notice. Continued non-compliance will result in formal HOA action and property lien review." That was the day I decided to fight back. I told Rachel, "I'm done being polite. I'm taking this to the county office." She looked up, serene as always. "Good, but do it quietly. Don't tell anyone yet." Why? Her eyes held something cold, professional. Because this isn't just about rules anymore. It's about something bigger. I didn't understand what she meant. Not yet. The next evening, I was repairing the porch light when I saw Karen standing across the street watching. She didn't smile this time. She just stared, clipboard tucked under her arm, dog leash in hand, as if she was memorizing me. When she finally turned away, Rachel joined me outside holding 2 mugs of coffee. "She's escalating," Rachel said softly. "Yeah, but why? What does she get out of this?" Rachel looked into the distance. "Control. It's the oldest addiction in the world." I laughed. "You talk like a psychologist." She smiled faintly. "Something like that." Then she added, almost too quietly for me to hear, "But if she keeps pushing, she'll find out what real authority looks like." At the time, I thought it was just a figure of speech. I didn't realize she meant it literally. If I had, maybe I would have seen what was coming the night our quiet neighborhood turned into a federal operation. The day after I told Rachel I'd had enough of the HOA, I woke up to find a bright yellow envelope stuck to our mailbox. Across the front in capital letters, it read, "Notice of Non-Compliance." Underneath was a list of violations, each more ridiculous than the last mailbox: paint, not HOA, approved color. Decorative stone border exceeds permitted radius. And my personal favorite? Porch light temperature too warm for neighborhood. Aesthetic. It wasn't even 8 a.m., and I could already hear Karen outside talking to a neighbor. Her voice carried like a siren. "Rules exist for a reason. If we don't enforce them, chaos follows." She sounded like she was running a miniature dictatorship instead of a neighborhood committee. Rachel read the letter while sipping her coffee. "You know, Mark," she said, "this looks less like a list of violations and more like harassment." I nodded, still half asleep. If she wanted me gone, she could just say so. Rachel set the letter down. "That's not how people like her operate. They don't ask you to leave. They fine you until you can't afford to stay." That hit me harder than I expected. Later that week, I attended another HOA review session. The board sat in a row like a jury from a sitcom, Karen in the center, her minions Doug and Cheryl on either side. The room smelled of disinfectant and arrogance. Karen began, "Mr. Harrison, we've had numerous reports that your property doesn't comply with community design standards." "Reports from who?" I asked. She smiled thinly. "We don't disclose complainant identities for privacy reasons." "So, anonymous tattling," I said. "Great system," Cheryl gasped. Doug frowned, but Karen didn't flinch. "These standards exist to maintain harmony," she said. "Without them, Maple Grove would lose its charm." "Charm," I repeated. "Lady, I've seen construction sites with more charm than this place lately." A few residents snickered quietly in the back, but one sharp look from Karen silenced them. Karen folded her arms. "Perhaps Maple Grove isn't the right fit for everyone." Rachel leaned forward calmly. "Perhaps leadership should remember, this neighborhood belongs to its residents, not its chairperson." The room went still. Karen blinked, caught off guard by Rachel's tone, steady, commanding, and just cold enough to make her uncomfortable. Karen gathered her papers quickly. Meeting adjourned, she said, and walked out, red blazer flashing like a warning light. That night, while we cleaned up dinner, Rachel said something that stuck with me. Mark, never underestimate someone desperate to control others. Fear makes people dangerous. I laughed nervously. She's just an HOA president, Rach. What's she going to do, write me to death? Rachel gave me a long look, the kind that tells you you're missing something important. You'd be surprised what people will do when they think they have power. Over the next 2 weeks, Karen doubled down. We received 3 more letters and 2 fines, one for leaving our garbage bin visible for 29 minutes, and another because Rachel's garden trellis obstructed the line of sight for pedestrians. I tried to talk to the neighbors, but they avoided eye contact. Mrs. Newman whispered that Karen once fined her $400 for hosting her daughter's birthday party because balloons weren't pre-approved. She has friends at City Hall, Mrs. Newman said, eyes darting nervously. Don't mess with her. I started to notice something darker in how everyone spoke about Karen, not annoyance, not frustration, but genuine fear. They believed she could ruin them. And somehow she had. One evening I walked to the mailbox and saw a white SUV parked near the corner. The engine was off, but someone was inside, a man wearing sunglasses just sitting there. When I approached, the SUV drove away slowly. Rachel, I said when I got home, you think Karen's hiring people to watch us? Rachel didn't even look up from her laptop. Maybe not. Either way, document it. What are you doing? I asked. Research, she replied. I'm looking into Maple Grove HOA's finances. You can do that, she smiled faintly. Public records are a wonderful thing. That night, I peeked over her shoulder and saw spreadsheets, lists of fees, names, and transfer accounts. There were payments to an LLC I'd never heard of, Maple Grove Maintenance Partners. Looks shady, I said. It is shady, she said, and it gets worse. She pointed at a column labeled consulting expenses. Over $150, 000, had been paid out in less than a year. Who the hell are they consulting? I asked. Rachel leaned back. No one. Karen's running something bigger than landscaping here. I stared at her, realizing she wasn't joking. The next morning I woke to banging on the front door. Karen stood there with her clipboard and 2 board members flanking her like bodyguards. Good morning, she said, falsely cheerful. Routine property inspection. We've had some complaints. Rachel crossed her arms. Without notice, that's illegal. Karen's smile faltered. As HOA president, I have the right to. Rachel cut her off, not without written authorization. And you don't have it. Karen's eyes flashed, but she turned away, muttering something about non-compliant residents. When she left, I asked, how did you know she couldn't do that? Rachel just said, because I've studied people who abuse authority my whole career. A few days later, we received another notice, a fine for obstructing HOA duties. Rachel laughed, but I saw something else in her eyes, calculation. That evening, she sat me down. Mark, if this continues, I'll need to step in. Step in? How? She hesitated. There are procedures I can't talk about. You're scaring me, I said. She touched my hand. Don't be scared, just trust me. That was the first time I realized there was something about Rachel I didn't fully know, something she'd been keeping under wraps. The tension kept building. HOA patrols started parking near our home at night. Karen's dog barked at our property nonstop. The next neighborhood newsletter listed recent violators, and our address was printed in bold. Rachel remained calm through it all, never raising her voice, never losing her composure. It drove Karen insane. Then one afternoon I saw something that chilled me. Karen stood by her car, talking on the phone, pacing back and forth. When she turned, the sun glinted off, something metallic inside her purse. A gun. I froze. Was it real? Was I imagining it? I didn't know, but I didn't tell Rachel right away. She had enough to worry about. That night, though, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch, listening to the crickets, and wondering what kind of neighborhood I'd brought us into. Rachel came out quietly and placed a blanket over my shoulders. She's unraveling, I said. I saw something today in her purse. Rachel didn't act surprised. I know, she said softly. And I'm prepared. Prepared for what? For when she crosses the line. The following week, Karen filed an official complaint accusing us of harassment. She claimed we'd spied on her property and tampered with HOA equipment. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh, until I realized it wasn't about truth anymore. It was about intimidation. Rachel didn't flinch. Good, she said. Now she's making documented threats. It means the clock's ticking. The clock? I asked. She looked me dead in the eye. Mark, sooner or later people like her go too far. And when they do, that's when everything changes. I wanted to press for more, but the way she said it, the weight in her tone told me it wasn't a warning. It was a promise. That promise would become terrifyingly real at the next HOA barbecue, when Karen finally crossed that invisible line and aimed a gun straight at my wife. The Maple Grove HOA barbecue was supposed to be the event that brought the community together. That's what the flyers said anyway. Every year, Karen hosted it in the Central Park near the lake, the same park she once fined a family $200 for using without prior scheduling. This year, though, things felt different. The invitation was practically a summons attendance mandatory for all homeowners. Non-participation may result in administrative review. Rachel laughed when she read it. Administrative review for skipping a hot dog. I tried to laugh too, but I had a feeling the barbecue wasn't about burgers or potato salad. It was about control, her kind of control. When we arrived that Saturday afternoon, the park looked like something out of a Stepford nightmare. Rows of folding tables covered with identical blue checkered cloths. A massive banner reading Maple Grove, a community of excellence. And at the center of it all, Karen in her signature red blazer, clipboard in hand like she was hosting a military inspection, not a cookout. She spotted us instantly. "Mark, Rachel. So glad you made it," she said, her smile tight as fishing line. "I wasn't sure you'd come after all the confusion lately." Rachel handed her a polite nod. "Wouldn't miss it. It's important to see who's running the show." Karen's eyes narrowed slightly, but she chuckled. "Oh, we all know who that is." Yeah, we did. And that was the problem. The first hour went smoothly enough. Kids played on the swings, the smell of grilled burgers filled the air, and the HOA board strutted around like mall cops with clipboards. But there was an undercurrent, you could feel it. Whispered conversations stopped when Rachel passed by. People looked nervous, glancing between her and Karen like they were watching a live match between a lion and a rattlesnake. Rachel stayed calm, as always, chatting kindly with Mrs. Newman, helping an older veteran reach his seat. She had that quiet confidence that made people feel safe around her. Karen hated that. I saw it in her posture, stiff clenched jaw, the way she kept pretending to check her clipboard while glaring at my wife. It wasn't about rules anymore. It was personal. At one point, Rachel handed a plate of food to a teenage boy, the son of a black family who had just moved in. "You can sit with us," she said kindly. The boy smiled, relieved. Karen swooped in seconds later. "Excuse me," she said loudly. "We have designated tables for guests. Residents should stick to their assigned sections." The boy's mother froze, visibly uncomfortable. Rachel straightened her voice, calm but firm. "It's a community barbecue, Karen, not a seating chart." Karen's tone sharpened. "Some of us prefer order." Rachel's eyes met hers, cold, steady, unblinking. "And some of us prefer decency." That did it. The crowd went silent. You could hear the wind rustling through the trees. Karen's face flushed crimson. "You don't speak to me like that in my community." Rachel took a slow sip of her lemonade. "Your community. Last I checked, we all pay the same dues." Karen's hands trembled. I saw it, the twitch near her jaw, the tightening grip on her purse strap. I started to step closer, sensing it before it happened. Karen's voice grew louder, shriller. "You think you're above the rules. You think you can just move in here and make a mockery of everything I built." Rachel tilted her head slightly, her tone low and measured. "You didn't build anything, Karen. You just took over what wasn't yours." Karen's composure shattered. She dropped her clipboard, fumbled in her purse, and then I saw it. A gun. For a second, my brain refused to process it. The sunlight glinted off the barrel as she pulled it free with shaking hands. A collective gasp swept through the park. Parents grabbed their children. Someone screamed. "Karen, put it down," I yelled, stepping forward. "Stay back," she shouted, pointing the weapon directly at Rachel. "You think you can embarrass me in front of my neighbors?" Rachel didn't move. Not an inch. She looked straight into Karen's eyes with an expression I'd never seen before, not fear, not shock. Control. "Karen," she said evenly, "you don't want to do this." "Oh, I do," Karen hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Rachel's voice dropped into something low, commanding, like steel wrapped in silk. "Neither do you." Karen's hand shook the gun, wavering between us. "You think you can talk down to me, you think." That's when Rachel spoke again, calm but cold as a knife. "Karen, lower the weapon. That's a direct order." The crowd froze. Even Karen hesitated, thrown off by the tone. It wasn't pleading. It was authority. Karen laughed shakily. "An order? Who do you think you are, the police?" Rachel took one step forward. "Higher." Karen blinked, confused. What Rachel's eyes didn't waver. "United States Secret Service Commander Harrison. You're pointing a firearm at a federal officer." For a full 3 seconds, no one made a sound. The world seemed to stop. Even the birds went silent. Then Karen laughed, high-pitched and nervous. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Rachel slowly reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small leather case. She flipped it open, revealing a gold badge and ID card. I'm not. Karen's face went white. Her arm faltered. But instead of lowering the gun, she screamed, "You're lying, you're trying to scare me." I lunged forward instinctively, but before I could reach them, Rachel stepped sideways, fluid and fast. In one motion, she twisted Karen's wrist, the gun dropping harmlessly into the grass. Karen yelped in pain as Rachel kicked the weapon away, all in under 2 seconds. The crowd gasped. Someone yelled, "She's got a gun." Another shouted, "Call 911." Rachel didn't even breathe heavily. She bent down, picked up the gun by the trigger guard, and unloaded it with precision. 9mm Glock, she said calmly. Unregistered. Safety off. Karen fell backward onto the ground, clutching her wrist, still shouting, "She attacked me! She attacked me!" Rachel turned to the stunned crowd. "I am Commander Rachel Harrison of the United States Secret Service. You all saw her point a loaded weapon at me and these residents." The silence broke with whispers and gasps. Some started filming. Others stepped back, unsure whether to clap or cry. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance, first one, then 3, then a whole convoy. Police cars poured into the park lights, flashing red and blue against the calm suburban sky. Karen was still screaming as officers restrained her, yelling about rights and lies and fake badges. But when Rachel handed over her credentials, the entire tone shifted. The chief himself saluted her. "Commander Harrison," he said, stunned. "We had no idea." "That's how it's supposed to be," Rachel replied. He nodded. "We'll handle this." As Karen was placed into the back of the cruiser, she glared at Rachel through the window. "This isn't over," she hissed. Rachel met her gaze, expression unreadable. "It never is." When the car pulled away, the park remained frozen in disbelief. Neighbors stood in clusters, whispering, watching my wife, the woman they'd thought was just another suburban resident, calmly give her statement to federal and local officers. I approached her slowly. "Secret Service commander, huh?" Rachel gave a tired smile. "Sorry I didn't mention it before dinner." I laughed more out of shock than amusement. "You've been undercover this whole time." "Retired," she said. "Mostly." Mostly, she looked at the departing police cars. "Sometimes the job follows you home." That night the neighborhood was silent. No kids playing, no porch lights flickering, just a heavy electric quiet. Rachel sat on the porch staring at the stars. "Do you think she'll come back?" I asked. "No," Rachel said softly. "But the people behind her might." What people? Rachel didn't answer. She just took a slow sip of her tea, eyes still on the dark horizon. And in that moment I realized something that chilled me. This wasn't just a neighborhood feud. My wife hadn't just stopped a crazy HOA president. She'd stepped into something bigger, something that hadn't ended yet. That night, after the barbecue, the flashing red and blue lights finally faded down the street, and Maple Grove fell silent again. For the first time since we moved there, the HOA had nothing to say. The community group chat, usually buzzing with complaints about lawn lengths and trash bins, went dead. Nobody dared mention what had just happened, not when the woman who ran the entire neighborhood had been hauled away in handcuffs for pointing a gun at a federal officer. And not just any officer, my wife. I sat at the kitchen table staring at Rachel as she wiped gunpowder residue off her hands. There was something surreal about watching the same woman I'd spent 20 years gardening and grocery shopping with now calmly disassembling a firearm like she was making tea. "Rachel," I finally said, "I think we need to talk about this whole commander thing." She gave a small smile. "I was wondering when you'd ask." Turns out my wife had been living a double life. Not in the scandalous way, no secret families or affairs, but something far more dangerous. Before we moved to Maple Grove, Rachel had been part of the Presidential Protection Division of the U.S. Secret Service. She'd spent nearly 2 decades guarding presidents, foreign dignitaries, and overseeing high-security operations. I remembered her disappearing for conferences and training trips years ago. I thought they were just government security consulting gigs. She'd always been vague about them. Now it all made sense. "I thought you retired," I said, half-stunned. "I did," she said, placing the gun parts neatly on a towel. "Officially. But sometimes the job doesn't retire you." "What does that even mean?" She looked up at me, her eyes sharp in the dim kitchen light. "It means when I see someone abusing power, I can't ignore it." The next morning, our neighborhood was swarming with police reporters and gawkers. Karen's face was everywhere, local HOA president arrested for assault and threat against federal agent. But here's the thing, the story barely scratched the surface. The official report called it a misunderstanding. No mention of unregistered firearms, no mention of the HOA's financial irregularities. No mention of the strange SUV that had been tailing us for weeks. Rachel didn't buy it for a second. "They're already covering it up," she said, flipping through her laptop as she scrolled the local news. "This isn't just about her ego. Someone wants this buried." She started connecting dots like she was back in an operations briefing. Every piece of HOA paperwork we'd received was scanned, analyzed, and compared. Every payment to that mysterious Maple Grove Maintenance Partners LLC was traced. And what she found made even my stomach turn. Karen hadn't just been a tyrant, she'd been a middle manager for a small web of money laundering operations disguised as neighborhood improvement funds. The HOA collected fake maintenance fees, funneled them through dummy accounts, and distributed them to companies that didn't exist. Someone higher up was pulling the strings. "Who would use a suburban HOA for laundering money?" I asked. Rachel gave a humorless laugh. "Someone who wants to hide dirty cash in plain sight. Nobody questions lawn maintenance fees." She was right. The perfect crime didn't need guns or heists, just paperwork, signatures, and scared neighbors. 3 days later, things got even stranger. Karen was released on bail. We learned it through the grapevine, or rather the HOA group chat, which suddenly reignited with cryptic messages like, "We should stay quiet," and "They said it's all being handled internally." "She's out," I said. "How is that possible?" Rachel didn't look surprised. "Because someone's protecting her." That night, she set up a small surveillance laptop near the living room window. "If she comes near us again," she said, "we'll know." "But why would she?" I asked. Rachel didn't answer immediately. "Because she's not afraid of us. She's afraid of what we might find." The next morning, Rachel got a phone call from an unknown number. She let it ring twice before answering. "This is Harrison," she said, voice suddenly formal, cold, clipped, efficient. I couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but whatever was said made her expression change. Her jaw-clenched, eyes narrowing. "Understood," she said finally. "I'll handle it." When she hung up, I asked, "Who was that?" She hesitated. "Old contact. Federal. Rachel." She met my eyes. "They want me to stay out of it, which means I won't." I sighed. "You ever thought of being a normal retiree?" She smiled faintly. "Not once." That afternoon, she went through the HOA's archived meeting notes. The more she read, the clearer it became that Karen's behavior wasn't random, it was calculated. The rules, the fines, the inspections, all of it was a way to push out homeowners who questioned where their fees went. Every family that sold their house was replaced within weeks by buyers linked to the same property company, a shell corporation under that same maintenance partner's name. "This is organized," Rachel murmured, scrolling through the records. "She's been turning the neighborhood into a front," for what I asked. "For laundering campaign donations, maybe, or defense contracts." "These are federal-level connections." My head spun. "So we're living inside a money-laundering HOA." Rachel gave me a grim smile. "Welcome to America." 2 nights later, around midnight, we heard the sound of tires screeching outside. Rachel looked out the window, a dark SUV idling by the curb again. "Same one," I whispered. "Same one," she said. "Stay here." Before I could stop her, she slipped on her jacket, pulled out her old service weapon, and stepped into the darkness. I followed from the porch, heart pounding. She moved like she'd never left the field, silent, precise. The SUV's headlights flashed twice, then it sped away. Rachel came back, her expression unreadable. "They're testing us," she said, "seeing if I'm still active." Active, she sat down beside me. If I were still in the system, there'd be consequences for them showing up. But since I'm not, they think they can scare you. I finished. "Exactly." She looked out into the night. "They have no idea what kind of mistake that is." The next morning, Karen showed up at our driveway. Yes, Karen. Same blazer, same smugness, but now with a subtle desperation behind the smile. Her wrist was wrapped in a brace from where Rachel had disarmed her. "Rachel," she said sweetly, "I think we got off on the wrong foot." Rachel folded her arms. "You threatened me with a gun." "Allegedly," Karen said, waving her uninjured hand. "Look, I've spoken with the board. We all want this to go away. The HOA, the fines, the charges, let's just move on." Rachel's tone was ice. "Who told you to say that?" Karen blinked. "Excuse me," Rachel stepped closer. "You're not smart enough to orchestrate this." "Who's backing you?" For the first time since I'd met her, Karen's composure cracked. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't understand. They'll kill me if I talk." Rachel didn't blink. "Then you'd better start talking fast." Karen glanced around the street, then leaned in close. "They're watching. They're everywhere. HOA meetings, county offices, realtors, all of it's connected." "Who's they?" Rachel pressed. But before Karen could answer, a black sedan rolled around the corner windows, tinted slow, deliberate. Karen froze. Rachel grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the house. Get inside, Karen shook her head. No. If they see me with you, it's over. And just like that, she ran down the street, disappearing between the trees, as the sedan cruised past like a shark scenting blood. Rachel stood in the driveway, staring at the taillights fading into the distance. She's scared, I said quietly. Really scared. Rachel nodded, jaw tightening. And if she's scared, that means we're close. That was when she opened her phone and made a single call. This is Commander Harrison, she said. Activate Maple Grove file. I want full surveillance authorization. Priority red. When she hung up, I just stared at her. You're going back in, aren't you? Rachel looked at me, calm, unflinching, deadly, certain. I never left. And at that moment I realized this was no longer just an HOA dispute. It was a federal operation, and the woman I married was stepping right back into the war zone she'd spent years trying to leave behind. The morning after Karen's midnight visit felt different. The air in Maple Grove was heavy, like everyone knew something was happening but didn't dare talk about it. Neighbors walked their dogs without making eye contact. Cars drove slower than usual. Even the birds seemed quieter, as if the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Rachel sat on the porch, a cup of coffee in one hand and her tablet in the other. She wasn't scrolling social media. She was reading case files, real ones. Ones I didn't know she still had access to. Your clearance still works, I asked, half joking. Rachel didn't look up. It never expires, just gets quieter. That was Rachel's way of saying yes, but don't ask how. By noon, 2 men in suits showed up, not local police, not HOA members. They introduced themselves as federal liaisons, flashing badges so quickly I couldn't catch their agencies. Their demeanor screamed cleanup crew. We're here to collect Commander Harrison's statement for internal documentation, one said, his voice smooth but cold. Rachel invited them inside, offering water like it was just another day. I sat quietly in the corner, pretending to check emails while listening to every word. The taller agent spoke first. Commander Harrison, we appreciate your assistance in the Maple Grove incident. However, for the sake of ongoing investigations, we ask that you refrain from any independent action. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Independent action, meaning he said carefully, we'd like you to stay uninvolved. The situation is under review. Rachel smiled politely. Translation, you want me to sit still while someone buries it. The agent's jaw tightened. Commander, that's not what we're saying. Yes, it is, Rachel said evenly. You're running damage control. Someone with influence doesn't want this HOA story to make headlines. The agents exchanged glances, not surprised, just caught. After a moment they stood. Thank you for your cooperation. When they left, Rachel watched them walk down the driveway. They weren't here for me, she said quietly. They were here to warn me. That night, we received a letter in our mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Just one line typed neatly on plain paper. Stop digging or you'll regret it. I showed it to Rachel. She barely reacted. Expected it. Expected it, I snapped. They're threatening us. She looked at me calmly. They're bluffing. If they wanted us gone, we'd already be gone. I stared at her, the way she said it, so casually, so certain. Sometimes I forgot that she'd lived through worse. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. 2 nights later, I woke up to the sound of gravel crunching outside. When I peeked through the blinds, I saw 2 shadows near our fence. They were moving slow, deliberate flashlights flicking across the yard. Rachel, I whispered. She was already awake, holding her service pistol low by her side. Stay here, she said. Are you? She cut me off. Stay. Here. She slipped out the back door, silent as a cat. From the window, I watched her move, controlled, disciplined. She waited until the flashlight beams crossed, then stepped out of the shadows and leveled her gun. Federal agent, she barked. Hands where I can see them, the 2 men froze. One dropped his flashlight. The other muttered, we're not here for trouble. Wrong neighborhood, Rachel said. Who sent you? The men exchanged looks. The shorter one finally stammered. We were just told to monitor who she pressed. Neither answered. They turned and bolted toward the street. Rachel didn't chase them. She holstered her weapon and returned inside. They won't be back, she said simply. Who were they, I asked. Her answer sent a chill through me. Private security, not government. Which means the people behind this have money, lots of it. Over the next few days, strange things kept happening. Our internet slowed to a crawl, then cut out completely. Rachel's car alarm went off at random hours. Someone even filed an anonymous complaint to animal control, claiming we were hoarding dogs. They're trying to rattle us, she said, unbothered. Standard intimidation tactic. Standard Rachel, this isn't a movie. These people, she cut me off again, her voice sharp. Mark, stop thinking like a civilian. You're safe as long as you stay predictable. They're not after you, they're after me. That shut me up, because deep down I knew she was right. A few days later, Karen resurfaced. Yes, again. We heard it first from Mrs. Newman, who came to our door trembling. She's back, she whispered. I saw her walking into the HOA office this morning with 2 men in suits. Rachel grabbed her jacket. Then it's time to end this. I followed her to the HOA, building a bland little structure near the park that suddenly looked more sinister than I'd ever noticed. The blinds were closed. A black sedan sat out front. Rachel parked a few houses away, watching through binoculars. That's them, she said softly. Same car that followed us before. We waited. 10 minutes later, Karen came out, flanked by the same 2 men who'd visited us. Her posture was stiff, her face pale. She didn't look like the self-proclaimed queen of Maple Grove anymore. She looked like a pawn. They're forcing her to cooperate, Rachel murmured, using her as cover. For what? Rachel lowered the binoculars. For something much bigger than HOA dues. That night, Rachel laid everything out on our dining table. Files, photos, payment records, like a detective piecing together a puzzle from hell. The more she connected, the clearer the picture became. Maple Grove Maintenance Partners was a fake shell company. It funneled HOA money through multiple small-town real estate funds. Those funds led to an offshore account tied to a defense contractor, Argentech Systems. What's Argentech? I asked. Rachel looked grim. A private weapons manufacturer. Government adjacent. If these payments connect, it means someone's laundering money for federal contracts through suburban HOAs. I blinked. You're telling me lawn fees are funding military weapons, indirectly, she said. But yes, the absurdity of it almost made me laugh almost. The next day, Rachel received an encrypted message from an old contact. They know. Leave the area. Now. She didn't hesitate. She started packing. We're leaving tonight. Leaving Rachel, this is our home. She zipped her duffel bag, eyes steady. It's just a house. You can rebuild a house. You can't rebuild your life. But as we were about to leave, Rachel froze. The front door was slightly ajar, and she was sure she'd locked it. Mark, she whispered back up. She pulled her gun and pushed the door open. The lights were off the air still. Then she saw a single envelope on the table next to her laptop. No return address. No footprints. Just a message. You should have listened. It's too late now. Inside was a USB drive. Rachel stared at it for a long moment, then sighed. They're taunting us. She plugged it into her laptop. A video loaded grainy security footage from our own backyard. It showed Rachel confronting the 2 men from before. A timestamp, an angle from somewhere high like a drone camera. They're watching from above, she said quietly. Then at the end of the clip, a single frame appeared. Karen's face crying, bruised, whispering into the camera. They're going to kill me. They're not what you think. And then static. Rachel leaned back, closing her laptop slowly. It's official, she said. We're past the HOA now. What does that mean? I asked. She stood up, eyes hard. It means Maple Grove isn't just a neighborhood. It's a front, and it's time we burn it down. She reached into the closet, pulled out a small black case, and opened it. Inside was a secure satellite phone, a federal ID, and a compact headset. Rachel, I said, what are you doing? She looked at me, voice calm but resolute. Activating Operation Maple Shield. And for the first time I realized whatever was coming next would make Karen's gun look like child's play. The night air smelled of cut grass and something sharper ozone, or maybe the metallic tang of fear. I thought the worst had already happened when Karen pointed that gun, but I had no idea how far this snake pit went or how carefully Rachel had been playing the long game. Mark, she said, as she clipped the headset to her ear, voice suddenly all business. Window 60 seconds. She moved like someone who'd rehearsed panic into choreography, calm hands, a face that gave nothing away. Her phone lit up with a stream of commands and little red dots mapped across our block. I'd watched her prepare for the worst, but I hadn't watched her plan the takedown. The operation started in silence. A low thrum grew in the sky, not police sirens, but the distant rolling beat of helicopters. Then, like a black-tide, vehicles appeared at the edge of Maple Grove, unmarked SUVs, armored vans, a 2-car caravan that moved as if choreographed. Headlights stabbed the hedges. Men in plain clothes peeled off and took positions behind trees and driveways beneath the park pavilion. Maple Shield is live, Rachel said softly into the headset. Phase 1 in motion. I could see the neighborhood change in real time. Porch lights flicked on people, peered out their doors, and phones began to buzz. Someone shouted, "What's that noise?" But the answer was waiting overhead. The rotors chopped the night like a drum roll. Blue and white strobe lights turned the cul-de-sac into the inside of a sleeping kaleidoscope. Then the real surprise, Blackhawks. Two of them, low and menacing, banked over Maple Grove and circled into position. The trees threw moving shadows. The leaves shivered as downwash hit the street. I'd seen military helicopters before on job sites, but never like this, flying in for a neighbor's quarrel. "Signal's good," Rachel said. "We're green." The plan was surgical. Teams fanned out to the HOA office to Harlan Pierce's property, the man everyone called the neighborhood's benefactor, and to the little storage unit behind the community center that until that moment had been nothing more than an eyesore. I watched through binoculars as men in tactical vests knocked on the HOA office door. When it opened, Karen stood there, first small red blazer, like a flag against the metal frame, flanked by two suited men who'd looked like protectors. She didn't have to be ordered. She stepped outside, and for a moment I thought she would turn and run. Instead, she looked right at our house, and somewhere in that look, I understood she was terrified of something far bigger than me or my roses. A team reached for her arm. Suddenly, she twisted and bolted, a desperate animal move. For a beat, the whole block held its breath. But they were quicker. Two men intercepted her. One moved in with an arm around her shoulders, the other shoved her to the ground. She screamed a sharp animal sound, and then the tone of the neighborhood changed. The scream was no longer a weapon, it was evidence. They had Karen in the back of an SUV before I could reach the driveway. I saw them lash a small evidence bag to the bumper and a portable hard drive box into the trunk. One of the agents cut something from her jacket, a small key, a slip of paper numbers scribbled in a frantic hand. "What's going on?" I asked a man who'd been at my fence, his badge tucked under his jacket. "Follow Commander Harrison's lead," he murmured. "She's in charge of this sector." Rachel moved like water through the melee calm, directing eyes on the prize. Her team swept the HOA office and the storage unit. What they found made my stomach drop: cardboard boxes stuffed with paperwork, envelopes stamped with corporate seals, ledgers with columns of dates and amounts, and a stack of invoices showing payments to Argent Tech Systems. There were contracts, unsigned POs, and a list of names, a long list, some of them familiar, some of them faces I'd seen in charity galas and campaign luncheons. Harlan Pierce's signature appeared in multiple places. Then came the part I didn't expect: cameras. Not the cell phone kind, but industrial-grade drone footage, high-resolution files footage from a camera hidden in the HOA office light fixture. There were timestamps stretching back months. Someone had been filming everything. Rachel handed me a folder without cutting her eyes from the scene. "Look," she said. "Ledger entries, Shell Corp transfers, and this," she pointed. A ledger labeled Campaign Logistics Argent Tech. It read like a cheat sheet for laundering small HOA fees, disguised as maintenance funneled into companies that paid larger amounts to Argent Tech, and then those funds resurfaced as consulting payments to political campaigns and suppliers. It was brilliant in its simplicity, hide big money in plain sight, and ugly in its reach. The names included people I'd trusted: a county commissioner, a local developer, a retired colonel who'd chaired the veterans group. And there at the top of a list, a name in block letters that made my chest go cold: Harlan Pierce. Harlan was a man of public smiles and private handshakes. He'd cut the ribbon at the Maple Grove playground. He'd donated the landscaping for the holiday display. People had called him generous. Rachel called him efficient. The two weren't mutually exclusive. "Arrest at Pierce's villa," a voice crackled through Rachel's earpiece. "One suspect in custody at HOA office." Evidence suggests interlink to federal contract bids and campaign donations. As the teams moved on Pierce's property, I watched through the binoculars as men in suits led a handcuffed Harlan out of his gate. He looked like he was trying to bargain with the world as they pushed him into an SUV. His face did not register surprise. It registered defeat. People who pull strings rarely get caught on the strings themselves, but this time the net had pulled taut. The biggest shock came when agents opened the trunk of one of the SUVs and extracted a waterproof case. Inside were contracts signed, dated, connecting Argent Tech to an offshore holding company that had paid directly into the Maple Grove Shell accounts. There were emails too, thread after thread, invoices, excuses, direction. The same thread tied payments to a procurement officer at the defense contractor's headquarters. It was a pipeline from pocketbooks to Pentagon-grade contracts funneled through HOA dues and neighborhood improvements. Karen watched it all from the back of a cruiser, eyes hollow. She mouthed something and handed over a small notebook to an agent. "They made me do it," she whispered. "They said they'd hurt my family." Later, when an agent read the notebook aloud in a staged public way so the neighbors could hear, the names kept falling: lawyers, lobbyists, a shell corporation in Delaware, an account in the Caymans. The ledger's multi-dexed columns revealed kickbacks and procurement favors. The neighborhood's tidy dollars had been inverted into monstrous money. It was dizzying. The thing I'd thought was funny, that a homeowner association could be a criminal front, was now a national story in the making. The detritus of the conspiracy lay across folding tables, flash drives, sealed envelopes, passports, and a stack of checks made out to political campaigns. Men in plain clothes bagged each piece like relics. And Rachel. She stood with her hands tucked into her jacket, the profile of someone who had seen too many betrayals to be surprised. When she turned to me, the light from a spotlight cut across her face like a symbol. They thought Maple Grove was insulated, she said quietly. They thought they could hide behind hedges and bylaws. Who are they? I asked. She swallowed. People who profit from conflict and contracts. Men with ties to Argentech. Our little HOA was the perfect laundering machine. Small checks, small complaints, a lot of fear. Nobody looks twice at a $50 maintenance fee. The helicopters screamed overhead like a metallic chorus. The neighbors gathered on porches in pajamas holding phones like talismans. Some cried, some clapped. Some stood with their arms crossed, not quite believing that their world was being dismantled on the street where they'd left their trash cans. And then the final strange sting of the night, Karen, still shaking, looked at Rachel and mouthed, "I thought I was protected." Rachel's face hardened, not with triumph, but with the hollow pity of someone who'd seen the depths of human greed. "You were protected," she said, voice low, "by the wrong people." By the time the last cars left Maple Grove, every mailbox had been rifled by law, every HOA ledger cataloged. Evidence teams drove off into the pre-dawn, carrying away the small-town masks to be studied under harsh lights and legal microscopes. We stood on the porch as the neighborhood exhaled. The helicopters retreated into the horizon like migrating beasts. The street lamps hummed. My neighbor's cat slipped out from under a bush as if nothing had happened. I looked at Rachel, at the way she held herself steady, and felt a wash of complicated relief, pride, terror, and the strange private knowledge that the woman beside me had been the brains behind a sting that took down more than a nosy president of a homeowners association. She had taken on corruption that braided local petty tyranny into federal crimes. "Is it over?" I asked. She slid the headset off, tucking it into her jacket like she was putting a child to bed. "Not yet," she said. "We've got paperwork to follow, people to flip, and a very long list of names to untangle. But tonight we took the first bite out of a monster." I breathed in Maple Grove's air and tasted for the first time since we moved in something like possibility. The twist had been bigger than anyone in this neighborhood could have imagined. What started as a petty power trip had been a casing for a much larger machine, and we'd just thrown a wrench into it. "Ready to go upstairs?" she asked softly. I nodded. We climbed the steps together as dawn crept over the hedges, and for the first time in weeks the neighborhood lights seemed a little less like prison bars and a little more like street lamps. By the time the sun rose over Maple Grove, our perfect little suburb didn't look perfect anymore. Police tape fluttered in the morning breeze. A dozen law enforcement vehicles lined the street, and half the neighbors were standing barefoot in their driveways, clutching coffee cups, still trying to understand what had happened. Overnight, the manicured lawns and picket fences looked surreal now, props on a stage where the truth had finally kicked down the door. Rachel sat on the porch steps, elbows on her knees, still in the same jacket from last night. She wasn't smiling. She rarely did after an operation. The look on her face wasn't pride, it was weariness. The kind that comes from realizing justice doesn't always feel good when it's done. I brought her a mug of black coffee. "It's over," I said. She didn't look up. "It's never over. Not for people like me." As morning light crept across the cul-de-sac, more agents arrived to catalog the aftermath. Karen was officially in federal custody, now transferred to a secure facility outside D.C. According to Rachel, she was cooperating, spilling everything she knew about the HOA network, Argentech, and the shadow donors who had used suburban associations as their money laundromat for years. It was bizarre to think that the same woman who once fined us for having wind chimes too loud for community harmony was now a federal witness. The neighborhood's remaining HOA board members were also arrested. Doug, the rulebook warrior who patrolled lawns with a tape measure, turned out to be a former accountant who'd cooked the ledgers. Cheryl, the neighbor who always brought deviled eggs to every meeting, had been laundering maintenance funds through a beauty supply business registered under her daughter's name. By noon, Maple Grove looked like a crime scene masquerading as suburbia. Reporters started arriving around 10 a.m., their vans parking haphazardly on the cul-de-sac. Cameras pointed at the playground and the HOA office where FBI agents were still hauling out boxes. One reporter shouted, "Sir, is it true your wife is Secret Service?" I just smiled faintly. "You'll have to ask her yourself." Rachel stood a few feet away, giving a quiet briefing to a man in a dark suit. When she finished, she finally walked back to me, pulling off her gloves. "They'll shut this place down," she said. "Every HOA connected to this ring will be audited." Maple Grove was just the start. "Good," I said. "About time someone audited the auditors." Rachel smirked. "You know, for a retired engineer, you've got a pretty sharp tongue. Comes with marrying a woman who can disarm terrorists at a barbecue." That got the first real laugh out of her in days. As the day stretched on, neighbors started to emerge from behind their curtains. Mrs. Newman came over clutching a casserole dish like a peace offering. "We had no idea," she said softly. "Karen always said it was about order, about keeping property values high." Rachel nodded. "Order's fine," she said, "until someone uses it to control you." Mr. Thompson, the retired veteran, joined us too. "I used to think the HOA kept us safe," he muttered. "Turns out they were robbing us blind." "Don't blame yourselves," Rachel said. "That's how people like her operate. They make obedience feel like security." He looked at her for a long time. "And what about you, Commander? What happens now?" Rachel hesitated before answering. Now I retire for real. Maybe." That afternoon, the official statement came through. Operation Maple Shield has successfully exposed a multi-state financial laundering network hidden within residential homeowners associations. Federal oversight will be expanded. The news went national within hours. HOA groups across the country panicked, some even shutting down temporarily to review operations. But the story that captured everyone's attention wasn't the scandal, it was her. The hoe that pointed a gun at a Secret Service commander, the woman who turned a suburban nightmare into a federal operation. Rachel's photo, taken mid-operation, made headlines, her hair tied back, the tactical headset, barely visible, her eyes steady under the helicopter light. She looked like the calm center of a hurricane. I couldn't help but smile. "You're famous now." She rolled her eyes. "For stopping a neighborhood, Karen, that's not exactly the legacy I planned." "Hey, you ended a criminal empire and saved me from getting fined over mailbox paint. I'd say that's pretty legendary." That evening, when the agents packed up and the last helicopter thundered away, Maple Grove felt eerily peaceful. The sound of cicadas returned. The wind chime, the same one Karen once tried to ban, swayed lazily on our porch, its notes soft and defiant. We sat outside, side by side, watching the sunset spill orange and pink over the rooftops. For once, there was no clipboard, no citation, no screaming neighbor, just silence, real silence. Rachel finally spoke. "You know what the funny part is, what all this started, because one woman couldn't stand not being in control, and she thought fear could keep everyone quiet. But fear doesn't build loyalty, it builds rebellion." I nodded. "And you were the rebellion." She gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe. Or maybe I just reminded people that bullies don't stay in power forever." A few weeks later, Maple Grove officially dissolved its HOA. The sign that once read, "Welcome to a community of excellence," was quietly removed. Residents voted to manage their neighborhood collectively. No presidents, no fines, no dictatorships in red blazers. I remember the last time I saw Karen on the news in a courtroom, hands cuffed, eyes empty. She looked smaller somehow. Like the walls she'd built around herself had finally crumbled. The judge's gavel fell like thunder. "Defendant is hereby sentenced to 8 years in federal prison." Rachel didn't gloat. She never did. She just turned off the TV and said, "Let's get groceries." Months passed and the chaos faded into memory. The neighborhood began to heal. The laughter of kids returned, lawns grew wild and beautiful, and for the first time the community felt free. Sometimes people would stop by just to thank Rachel, neighbors, reporters, even strangers who'd read about her story. She always gave the same response: "Don't thank me. Fix your own HOA." I'd laugh every time. One night, as we sat under the porch light, I asked her something that had been on my mind for a while. "Do you ever miss it?" "The missions, the adrenaline." Rachel leaned back, looking up at the stars. "Sometimes. But mostly I miss believing that we could stop all the bad guys. Turns out most of them wear suits and carry clipboards." I chuckled. "Guess evil downsized to the suburbs." She smiled faintly. "Then I guess it's my job to keep the suburbs safe." We sat in silence for a long time. The air smelled like jasmine and rain. The chaos was gone, replaced by something simple: peace earned the hard way. And maybe that's what this whole story was really about, not just revenge or justice, but restraint. Power means nothing if it isn't guided by empathy. Authority without compassion turns into tyranny, whether it's a nation or a cul-de-sac. That's the lesson Rachel left me with. You can't control people into goodness. You can only lead by example. Karen thought she could rule through fear. Rachel proved that courage and integrity still win, even against the loudest voices in the room. And as for me, I finally learned to appreciate the quiet. Now, when I hear the wind chime ring at night, I think of that moment, the calm after the storm, the woman beside me who never lost hers, and the neighborhood that learned freedom is worth a little chaos. So yeah, HOA Karen pointed a gun at my wife. But what she really did was point it at her own downfall. Sometimes the smallest battlegrounds reveal the biggest truths. Whether it's a boardroom, a government, or a neighborhood, people with unchecked power will always test how far they can go until someone draws a line and says enough. Rachel drew that line. And maybe we all should in our own ways. Don't be afraid to stand up to bullies, even the ones hiding behind rules or uniforms. Real authority protects, it doesn't intimidate. If this story reminded you of someone you've met in your own neighborhood, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and whether your HOA needs its own Operation Maple Shield. And of course, hit subscribe, because in the world of HOA stories, justice always finds a way.